We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch. Hello, I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
You're still Rob, that's excellent. We are back for part 2 of the June 2026 Doctor Who show. If you missed part 1, it came out yesterday where we had our extra long news segment plus our usual short topics. And now we've got part 2 where we're about to dive into pure, uncut, cold take on the Ncuti Gatwa era, Rob.
Yes, and having already recorded this, I know it's quite a good episode.
Look, I hope it is. We agree on some things. We disagree on some other things, as is our usual take. But yes, we will now just dive straight into our main topic as we normally would.
Yes, and stick around for some listener feedback at the end.
And a poll.
Oh yes, that's important.
Love us a poll. So our main topic is something we have had penciled in for some time. Going back a number of years now, 12 months after the end of the Jodie Whittaker, Chris Chibnall era, we did a look back. We did an ultimate cold take, and we actually found that we enjoyed watching those episodes back outside the hard grind of it being the brand new episode of Doctor Who, a lot more in hindsight.
Yeah.
So we said, let's do the same thing a year on from Gatwa RTD2. We did hot takes on all of these, but the hot take is literally, in some cases, the closing credits were just disappearing from my television as I would turn the mic on to speak to you, Rob. They were that hot. This has got time to look back at them without all that pressure, to look back at them as part of a now completed whole era of the show. It's an era we still don't know quite what its future's going to be. Do the rights, certainly outside the UK, for this era at some point revert from Disney to somebody else? Or will this be, as I've said before, like the ITV season of the goodies that's always a bit separate, at least outside the UK? We don't know. We agreed we would each watch 3 to 4 episodes to judge this era by. We didn't tell each other what they were, so there was the possibility that we might overlap, which was just part of the fun. But we did that. Rob, you watched how many?
I watched 3, Dave.
I watched 4.
Of course you did.
Look, but to be honest, it was more than anything just me not wanting to cut another one off my short list and going back, bugger it, I'll watch 4. And I just thought there are so few episodes. I don't think we officially said we wouldn't do 2-parters, but I think we both kind of knew each other wasn't going to do a 2-parter.
Sure.
So that really narrowed down the number of episodes to watch. So the probability was that we would not be watching 7 between us. In fact, we did watch 6 between us. There was 1 overlap. But before we dive into those episodes, Rob, overarching thought from you?
Well, look, to some large degree, Dave, I've already put my cards on the table about tonight's topic, because earlier on in the news I said I didn't think much of the RTD2 era, which by and large is the Ncuti Gatwa era. I don't think it will be a surprise to listeners, though, if they were around for our hot takes, so I don't feel like this is a revelation of biblical proportions here at the start of the discussion by any means. There were episodes I liked in the Gatwa era with very minimal, what on earth is this moments. But I probably only went into bat for maybe 3 out of the 8 episodes in each season, which isn't a great hit rate, but certainly not, I hate them all either. So what I've wanted to do tonight with my picks wasn't to cling to things I knew would be comfortable and probably still enjoyable to watch, but put on things I'd had some sort of reaction to in some way, and see if that experience that we've both had over the years of revisiting things without the expectation of, this is brand new Doctor Who and I need to have an opinion in half an hour's time for the hot take, like you were alluding to earlier, would in any way change how I saw the stories now, a year or 2 years on in some cases. So that's how I chose my episodes, the more uncomfortable episodes for me.
Yes, I also sat down and said, right, I don't want to watch the ones that I just absolutely loathed at the time, because the chances are that those things wouldn't have changed. There was only one that I absolutely ruled out from the start, and that was the Interstellar Song Contest, because I had quite a rant about that in our Season 2 summary. The key tenets of that rant, the fact that somebody thought it was smart to do a story about terrorists attacking a musical festival a year after terrorists actually did massacre people at a musical festival, and then try to make sort of glib middle class points about it. I just, that is not going to change after a year. It is not ever going to change. I doubt I'll ever quite get to terms with that episode. So there's no point having that conversation.
Yeah.
I picked 4 episodes where I thought, I'm still not quite sure how I feel about this, and I want to appreciate it as an episode, not as a new piece of Doctor Who.
Very fair.
With that, we'll go through our list. We'll do it in broadcast order. And Rob, you are both opening and closing the batting. But as we are at the start, what was your first pick to watch?
My first pick, Dave, was The Devil's Chord.
Yeah, okay. What did you make of it?
Looking back at it now, I think the core concept of this story is actually very strong. A villain who steals music from the world fits Doctor Who, or at least New Who, very nicely, I think. You throw in some scenes like Ruby's piano performance on the rooftop, or the Doctor creating a sound bubble and plunging everything into silence on the soundtrack, travelling to a ruined London in the future, and the Doctor's way to explain it is, I think without music the human race goes sour. Without any way of expressing a broken heart, they go to war without realising why. That's really bloody good. Or even little bits of fan service that are sprinkled in there where the Doctor's like, I'm over there right now with my granddaughter in Shoreditch. This episode has quite a few moments on the positive side of the ledger. You watch them, and well, I watch them at least, and think, yep, this could be from any New Who episode since 2005, even New Who episodes I really, really love. There is nothing wrong with this bit at all, or this bit, or this other bit, and I found myself putting many things on the positive side of the ledger. There is a but I'll stop there for the moment.
So I obviously haven't watched this. I rated it as possibly the worst of that first season, and I think because it did feel like it had wasted its opportunities, particularly being the one with the Beatles, and the Beatles are just badly done. And I think that the desire to be different and lighter, and as I said, perhaps in the news thing, closer to reality, closer to real people, meant that you just did things in a very big way up to and including a song at the end, hit the mark wrong for me. How did it hit for you this time, that stuff?
Well, you'll notice I didn't mention any of that stuff.
I do. That's why I asked you a question.
I didn't mention the song at the end. I didn't mention how the Beatles were used. Let me throw it straight back at you. Do you remember all the things I was mentioning, like Ruby performing on the rooftop, or that sound bubble, or going into the future, or any of that? Do you remember any of those bits as being good?
No, absolutely. As you mentioned them, I found myself nodding, going, yeah, I remember that. That was good. Yeah, I remember that. That was good. Now, if you'd said to me, what do you remember from that episode? They wouldn't have been things that that came to my mind.
Yeah.
But I do remember them when you point me to them, and of course I would remember them if I watched it.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of doing these, a year or two onwards. We can pick up on stuff like that, and I think there'll be more of that probably in both of our comments tonight. The use of the Beatles, Dave, does suck, but Jinx Monsoon as Maestro is the real sticking point in this episode still for me. I think this is RTD saying, right, I'm going to have a villain in this. And the villain's going to be a drag queen. Won't that be marvellous? Drag queens are topical. And people who watch RuPaul's Drag Race will find it amazing. And won't it piss off people who don't like drag culture? Because, actively trying to piss off people is a key part of making TV and film now, apparently. Already you can see where it's going to fall over, because the vast majority of the Doctor Who audience don't watch RuPaul's Drag Race. They don't have an interest in drag culture. That's not to say the majority hates drag culture. Let's be very clear on what I'm saying. I think the majority were basically indifferent to it on the whole. It's simply not a draw for them. It's not interesting to them. It doesn't speak to them. So Jinx Monsoon comes on, and I think the mass audience is like, okay, this is a choice. And when your villain doesn't cut through like that and isn't particularly well acted either, and just has these two modes, like either super cheesy cabaret or shouting in a hyper masculine voice, you're frankly pushing shit uphill from the start. So in some ways, I did appreciate elements of this story more, because there's some good stuff in it that I think has been forgotten over time, because the shorthand for this episode's become, it's the fucking shit one, you know. Those good bits do get forgotten. But its downfall for me remains the villain. And it's frustrating, because I can even see ways you could have still used Jinx Monsoon and made it a lot better. But, oh well, water under the bridge now.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate part of the discourse around that episode that you almost couldn't comment on Jinx Monsoon's portrayal of the character without having to qualify it as I'm pro or anti drag act.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very frustrating part of that discussion, because as you say, I think most people neither are pro or anti, they're just indifferent.
Yeah.
And we're just rating this individual's performance, as being either gloriously camp or terribly over the top. Take your pick.
Yeah, I can't say it was one note. I think it was two note, no pun intended, but not much more than that.
Fair enough. Well, I carried on in season 1 with the next episode, which was Boom. And that was the first one I looked at. This is one I actually had very few memories of, other than it being the Moffat one. And I watched it again and had an interesting time with it. I do think that it works for the most part quite well as a standalone episode. I do think that Ncuti Gatwa gets to do some acting in it that is beyond just the babes version of the Doctor.
Yes.
And that was a really good thing to see. And I think something that I did notice in these rewatches is that there is more of him actually being serious and down to earth and mysterious than I remembered, because it is overshadowed in the memory by the babes stuff, which is a shame. I was fascinated by the fact that whilst it looked colourful, it looked small. And I do contrast it with the Whittaker era, which looked big and sumptuous. I think this one did feel colourful but small. The plot probably isn't quite enough for the length. Knowing how it ended, because I've seen it before, I was sort of like, okay, kind of get there now. Like I get it. Okay, you can get there now. So it dragged a little bit, but the good bits were good. I'll just say here, and I'll speak more about it in my next pick, seeing that Sue Tech person on the ambulance did make me just go, well, I know that's not going to pay off.
I was surprised you picked this one, Dave, because my memories of it were that, oh my God, Stephen Moffat has swung in and saved the RTD2 era. I remember being very happy with this one. That said, I take on board your point about it being small. And when you're saying, the Whittaker era looked big, I was wanting to jump in and butt in and say, yeah, and it was also made with a lot less money too. So what on earth was going on with this Disney era?
Yeah.
But let me go back to the first point I made. I was surprised you picked this, because I thought this was one of the ones we really quite liked.
I did remember that I quite liked it, but I didn't remember why.
Okay.
And I didn't remember what it was.
Oh, right.
It's, I remembered the sort of the setting in the cave or the valley, whatever it is. I know that it's the one where he stands on a landmine. I knew there was the gross people were reduced down to sort of battens thing. But the rest of it was kind of a bit of a blur. And I thought, let's dive in. And there was a lot more to it that I had forgotten. There were the relationships between the characters. I'd forgotten that, one of the cast members turns up as a companion in a year's time.
Yeah.
And I did have a moment of, that's right, she was in this, wasn't she?
Verita Sethu was in this.
Verita Sethu was in this, yeah. So there were moments like that for me. And again, I got to assess it not as this is the one where Stephen Moffat has to come in and save the show, but just as this is an episode I've put on today that happens to be written by Stephen Moffat. And I think it is better for it not to be watched with that pressure.
Yeah. My memories of it remain quite positive. I wouldn't mind rewatching this one. This is one, obviously, because I had different criteria looking at stuff that I found more problematic. I wasn't going to watch it this time around. But that's one that when I pull out these Blu-rays again, I will probably watch, because that is one that I remember being enjoyable and comfortable to watch. I liked it.
Good. So I kept going. The next one is mine as well. And I watched 73 Yards. And I watched this because it has been... Controversial is not the right word, but there have been very different takes in fandom about this one.
Yeah.
I thought I'll dive back in and see how it goes. And it was actually an intellectually fascinating experience for me to watch it now, knowing what I know, knowing how it ends, knowing what doesn't pay off long term. I almost found myself watching it in stereo in two parallel tracks.
Explain.
Because there was a part of me that was generally going, this is really good television. This is spooky. This is curious. This has got some nice location footage. This has got some really tragic moments. It's well performed. As just a piece of ephemeral entertainment, this is entertaining. There was another parallel track where I'm watching it going, well, that won't pay off. That won't be explained. That doesn't get paid off. He doesn't come back. That makes no sense. And I couldn't quite work out which one was the right one. And it's probably going to take some time before I can just watch 73 Yards and go, you know what? I know that none of this will be explained. I know that none of this will pay off, but I should enjoy a very well-made piece of television. I still say it makes no sense. I still say that, what causes it all to happen makes no sense. The time paradox makes no sense. The physics of the future woman who is always 73 yards away, like that makes no sense. And it makes no sense that, why doesn't Ruby just get on a plane?
Right.
Why doesn't Ruby get go into a building that's more than 73 yards tall? Why does she have to sort of let this thing dominate her life? To me that doesn't work. But again, it's played really, really well, so it's all fine. I'd forgotten or didn't remember how late in the episode Roger Ap-William comes into it. He's only in about the last 10 minutes. I was sitting there going, this is almost over and we haven't got to the bad dude yet. So that was quite a surprise to me. I remember that being quite dark, and it was quite dark, and I think they don't quite lean into the nasty aspects of Roger's character as much as they should. In fact, RTD almost takes a comic book sort of like, I'll imply he's sexually harassing people and he's wicked and all the rest of it. But who cares, because he's about to launch a nuclear war for no apparent reason. We'll talk about that. That's much more interesting than, a real person being a bastard. Interesting choice. It goes nowhere. It absolutely goes nowhere. I remember watching this at the time. We were saying, is the pirate dude that they're talking about, does he come back in the season? Does Roger Ap-William, is he going to be the big bad? They're going to go to the future where he's the Prime Minister again? Or is he a manifestation of something else? And nope, none of this would ever matter ever again. So did I enjoy it as a piece of television more than last time? Yes. But that's only because I've accepted that it makes no sense and none of it pays off.
Yeah, well, look, I think this is just a hallmark of this era. When you think about things that are still up in the air, who is the boss? I don't know. What's going to happen with the Master being trapped in the Toymaker's gold tooth? The woman's hand picked up at the end of that episode. Will Rogue stay trapped in hell? How does Rogue make telephone calls from hell? I don't know. What the hell was happening with Susan? Ruby never gets a proper farewell at the end of this era. And was Billy the new Doctor? There's some things that were still up in the air that I'd made notes on earlier.
I said earlier in the first portion of this episode that I'd come back to the mystery boxes. This was the point of the rewatch where I've just gone, yep, mystery boxes are terrible. They rarely pay off well. All of the ones set up here either didn't get paid off or were paid off badly. Don't do this ever again.
Very fair. Very fair, Dave.
Now, the next episode in our run sheet is the overlap one. So, Rob, I've spoken for the last two. I'll let you go first.
Yes, we're going to be talking here about the robot revolution. I think, like Devil's Cord, this one came across to me as having a core concept that is actually really strong too. It is unashamedly a comedic bonkers episode or story. You have to be dialed into it. But if you are dialed into that with 1950s looking rocket ships landing in backyards and robots smashing up houses and a cat getting zapped and it's just a black mark on the ground, and being taken to a planet named after what it said on a star chart your boyfriend bought you 17 years ago, if you can go with that, this is just fun. And I do think the way Belinda's written is a really strong companion debut, a super strong debut actually. She's older, she's in her 30s, which is quite different to most of the female companions ever on the show really. She knows her own mind, she doesn't take any shit off the Doctor. All of that's great. We have the Doctor laying in wait for her 6 months prior to her arrival on the planet. And, you know, he's taken on who he thinks will be his new companion, and then she gets killed. Oh, spoilers, everybody. All of that is quite interesting stuff. There is plenty here that's delivering if you're tuned into its wavelength and you want to be along for the ride. That was my big thought as I watched this. I think the weak part of the story is centered around the obsession that Alan has for Belinda. I think it's a solid idea as well. You know, men are obsessed by women every day, and women are obsessed by men, and men are obsessed by men, and women are obsessed by women. You know, obsession is a universal thing.
And small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri are obsessed by other small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri.
There you go. But then RTD dials it up higher. You know, the obsession is because Alan is a weird computer gaming incel. Won't that be topical? Won't that be interesting? And I think it fell flat for a variety of reasons. Now, I can't discount that some weird computer gaming incels in the audience might have felt seen, and so they arced up about it. But I think more broadly, it just felt like shoehorning in a topic for the sake of it. You know, obsession alone was enough to drive this storyline. What will a person do to be with this other person forever? That's a tale you can tell today, 50 years ago, 500 years ago. You can take it back to antiquity, and it still makes bloody sense. And I think if the story stayed in that ballpark, it would have resonated better. It just felt a bit cheesy to be so on the nose and so pulled from the headlines, as we sometimes call it, to go in the direction they did. And then the Doctor's, "Yes, Queen," and the high kick as the sperm and egg Alan gets destroyed at the end by the cleaning robot. People were like, and I was like especially, is that the character of this Doctor? He celebrates death? Does he? Wow. I'll shut up for the moment.
The first thing I'll say, Rob, is that when I looked at the list of 4 stories I picked, I was a little bit worried. I thought, what if Rob's picked 3 of these 4? That's not going to make for a good episode. But I thought, you know what? No matter what, Rob won't have picked the Robot Revolution. Don't be silly.
Why is that?
I don't know why. I just had this feeling it was kind of this forgotten episode that you might think you'd said all you wanted to say about and you wouldn't pick it.
Right.
So, I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows the mysteries of Rob's brain?
Certainly not me.
I picked it because it was another one. When I looked through the list, I just thought, I actually don't remember a lot about this. I remember it being controversial, not in a sort of it's controversial way, but just in there are different ways you could take this and does this work sort of thing. So I thought I'd dive back in. And like you, I do think that watching it again, I really did see just that basic, fun, bonkers adventure that does work. Once again, I think it looks colourful, but it does look small.
Yeah.
I think that there is a sense of adventure that it works well. I think there's a set of stakes that works well. And yes, the death of the interim companion, if you like, was a good moment. I think that the confrontation with the sergeant from the Pink Marine TV show was really cool. It was good to see that actor turning up. Like, there were really good moments in this. And I thought fundamentally this is a really good episode of Doctor Who that looks colourful. I agree with you that, again, RTD went too far. Making this a story about controlling obsession between people in a relationship was there. It was meaningful, it was important, it squarely falls into the ethos of Doctor Who, as I discussed earlier in our episode, but to twice have to give it a name and say, this is the planet of the incel, he's an incel. I just thought, I don't know anyone who uses that word in regular conversation. I don't really know what that word means, and now it just feels like an incredibly dated, this is a thing that was going to be a big deal in 2025. And I don't know, it felt over the top. The reveal, it's not AI, it's Al, was just stupid.
That was lame.
It was just really, really lame. That was disappointing for me. But I'll finish on the positive. I remember at the time saying Belinda could be the next Dr. Liz Shaw. And I watched this and just went, yeah, she was so good in this episode. And then just thinking, how sad.
Yeah.
Because I know what happens next.
Yeah, exactly right, which is also one of the curses when we do these rewatches and you know where things are going. Sometimes things don't work out. I'll just add that it's one of those stories where I absolutely get along with quite a lot of it and think this is almost good. But some parts are just needlessly, for f***'s sake. Seriously?
The fundamental adventure in all the episodes that we've discussed so far is actually pretty strong. Mm-hmm. And that's an important takeaway that I'll probably expand on as we get going.
Okay.
My fourth and final one, Rob, was Lucky Day, which I watched because I wanted to give it another go. Mm-hmm. I remember at the time rubbing up against some of the issues here, and I thought, I want to give this one another go. The first thing I'll say is that Jonah King as Conrad is one of the great performances of this era. He's a very strong actor. I understand from people who know about things behind the scenes, he's a very sort of traditional classical actor who cares about his roles, who puts in extra rehearsal time, who works with a director on the character and how it's all going to work. He really is a serious craftsman in the old school of acting. And I think that really shows here. I've written here, the plot is all over the shop, but it just works, And I think that's fair. When I watched it the first time and I was trying to piece it all together, that I think means that you do see the plot holes in the plot more clearly, and that is difficult part to watching it. Watching it for a second time where I know sort of the beats of it, I know how it's going, and I just go, I'm going to enjoy this adventure. I really enjoyed this adventure. I think that it works really, really well. The twist where Conrad turns out to be a bad guy who is basically entrapped Ruby works really, really well. I think that the climax works pretty well as well. Mm-hmm. All of that said, the plot doesn't really make sense. There is, the big gaping hole that Ruby and her family can Google Conrad to such an extent they find topless photos, but not that he has millions of people listening to his podcast like that.
Yeah.
But okay, there are stories from the Classic Who that have equally dodgy plot contrivances. Fine, I can forgive it of that. I think that the Doctor's epilogue where he comes in to lecture Conrad is lame. I think that Unit is lame. But fundamentally, the adventure of somebody who has decided that Unit is not on their side is a really interesting one. It's spooky, it's well shot. This is one that actually does look expensive. It doesn't look small. Mm-hmm. So I like that. I like, and I don't know if this is deliberate, but, the point where Unit is just arresting people because they don't like them, you go, yeah, maybe Unit actually isn't quite the democratic, liberal, open organisation that we think it is. Maybe they are actually slightly problematic. They don't really explore that, though. The big problem, Rob?
Yeah.
None of this pays off.
No.
Conrad goes from being a conspiracy theorist podcaster to a misogynist sort of something for no apparent reason. The Unit stuff doesn't really go anywhere. Again, standalone adventure. I really enjoyed this. Mm-hmm. As part of an ongoing era, it doesn't work.
Yeah, as you've been talking about it, I've been piecing the story together again in my mind because I haven't rewatched this since it went out. And I was thinking, yeah, there were bits of this that were good. And when they were in that country village, a Unit came belting down and in their Land Rovers and stuff. That looked like it had a bit of budget. Yeah. I remember this. I remember this bit. I remember that bit. Yeah. But yeah, there were just holes in it. And again, we've hit this thing again. When you know where it's going, it just doesn't deliver. Yeah, you're quite right.
Our final pick, Rob, yours final, final one for the whole episode. What was it?
Dave, it was the story and the engine.
Nice.
And I'll start by saying it's 3 out of 3 for my picks tonight in terms of storylines that when I rewatched them this past month, I think are really solid, all of them. At the time, I remember being less enthusiastic about this one. I wasn't quite feeling it. And I had looked into who'd written it and discovered he'd never written for television before at all. And that really coloured my reaction further. Like, I'm not liking this. And RTD's had this guy who's never even written frigging television? Like, Christ. So it actually excited me that I was feeling something new about it this time around. I just sat back and let it wash over me, very much as a whimsical sci-fantasy kind of thing. And I found myself thinking, you know, if Neil Gaiman wasn't cancelled these days, and Neil Gaiman had wrote this, it's got ancient gods and quite weird flourishes. These are in Neil Gaiman's wheelhouse. And he brought some of his former star power to it. I think people would be hailing this as really top-tier stuff. I totally believe that. I actually found very little to criticise this time around. There were a few things like, you know, isn't it strange we're talking about gods, but it's not the gods who are making up the theme of this era. They're just sort of other gods in another place. And why is it a giant spider? Is it just because the stories have made a web, so it has to be a spider? Like, I don't get that still. And how does Ncuti remember what he did when he was the fugitive doctor? Isn't the whole conceit that the doctor doesn't remember that? But I wasn't too bothered at the same time, and I actually started thinking about some wider commentary on this story and the theme of how sometimes ideas can get cemented that weren't entirely true to begin with. And I'll try to explain what I mean. I listened to a podcast a few months ago discussing this story, and one of their big points, and I promise they weren't being mean when they were saying this, was that the Doctor was essentially cosplaying being an African. They pointed to him wandering through the town in local dress and the hat and everything and high-fiving people and doing the accent. And they argued that the Doctor isn't Nigerian, which is quite fair. The Doctor isn't Nigerian. So they felt conflicted that the Doctor was perhaps just performing with these locals. And I remember thinking, well, that's an interesting observation, actually. But when I rewatched this, there's a line addressing that very thing. The Doctor explicitly says early on that he's an alien. He says this to Belinda. He says he's an alien, and he acknowledges he's not one of these people. But while he has this particular appearance outwardly, when he's on Earth, Lagos does feel comfortable for him to exist in. And I thought, there you go. So I think a rewatch is good for anyone out there, not just with this story, but with any story. It's worth going back and checking what was actually on screen, what was said, before relying too heavily on the conversation that inevitably grows up around something after the fact, whether it's one you've heard in fandom or it's one you've made up yourself and repeated a few times so it's become reality to you. Sometimes the original criticism that was made still stands. But I think sometimes you'll discover the episode was doing more than you gave it credit for. And I think those podcast guys, who I was listening to a few months back, they would find that if they actually went back to the episode and watched it now.
This is one that I did watch twice before we did our season wrap-up, Rob, because I remember wanting to dive into it and give it a bit more, try and understand it more, I guess you could say. I'm going to compare the story in the engine to a favourite story of yours, Rob, and that is Kinder.
Oh, yes, please.
In that I think in both of the cases, when you watch it for the first time completely cold, there's a very large element of sitting there going, what the fuck is this all about?
Yeah.
But when you know that it's that sort of an episode and you're in the mood for, this is going to be a bit different, a bit sort of fantastical, a bit spiritual, it's going to delve into some different cultural stuff, and you watch it going, I'm ready for this, you do sort of sit there and go, yeah, okay, this is a bit different. It's a bit weird. It's maybe a bit uncomfortable sometimes. It maybe doesn't quite make sense as much, but it's doing something different and ethereal, and that works.
Yeah, and this is why I deliberately called it sci-fantasy. And just letting this sci-fantasy pseudo Neil Gaiman type thing wash over me, because I like that kind of storytelling. I really do. And this time around, I was open to it, and I'm not trying to sound wanky, but I just received it, and I really got into it. As I say, a few niggles here and there, but I liked it a lot more than the first time I watched it. And I did only watch it the once.
That's very good. That's very good.
Yeah, so I was very happy with that rewatch.
So, Rob, we've now each watched some episodes. We've now talked about the episodes we've watched. The big headline for me, my big cold take on the Gatwa era, having gone through this exercise, is not one of anger. It's not one of delight. It's not one of disgust. It's one of sadness.
Yeah.
Because every one of the 4 episodes I watched, I've gone, there is a really good intent here. There is fundamentally a very good, enjoyable story here. 73 Yards, really good piece of television. Lucky Day, really well-made piece of television. Boom, good piece of writing with good acting. Robot Revolution, entertaining. All of them are let down by a consistent number of things, which is a poor execution, which is that it looks cheaper and smaller than the Chibnall era, that Belinda has been wasted, and in some ways Ruby is also wasted. I think both of them had a huge potential that was not quite matched. And fundamentally, I think that I don't get the point of Ncuti's Doctor. I think that his Doctor is too everyday, normal, could be there at a nightclub with you, and not mysterious enough. Not ever. I'm not saying he's never mysterious. I'm not saying that Ncuti Gatwa doesn't give some really good moments as the Doctor, but I think that he feels like somebody taken out of RTD circle in 2024, 25 and just acts like it and not like I expect the Doctor to be. So that is a shame. I have one more thought, but I'll let you give your closing thought, Rob.
Well, look, I've got comments on Ncuti and Millie, so let me rip into those, because that's what we've just been talking about. When Ncuti was cast, I think we both had warm feelings towards his casting. Yes. You'd seen him in things. I still haven't seen Sex Education, by the way, but you had seen him in things. And I remember you also had this idea that he had a big social media following, so that was going to potentially bring a whole new group of people to the show. A very fair assumption, to come and follow their guy and see what he was up to in this new show. And I was intrigued by having a young guy, clearly a bit of a clothes horse. I could see that straight away. In every photo, he was in different clothes and he looked bloody great in all of them. Big smile. And I thought, okay, here comes the dashing young Doctor who's going to look super cool. And with RTD back, we're going to be retreading Tennant, but without casting a David Tennant lookalike or someone acting like Tennant. And that's really smart. It's same, but different. So I felt the casting was smart. I thought there was some thinking going on behind it, but in practice, it didn't work out that way. And I still find Ncuti's take on the Doctor quite odd. Even when he's telling people on screen who he is, it's like he's just repeating what someone told him the Doctor is. Which is obviously the case, as it's in a script. I do get that. But do you know what I mean? It feels like he's just relaying information rather than actually being the character most of the time. Sometimes he'll say something doctorish, and I'll think, oh, good, that was good. But then other times it just feels slightly off, like a radio that's not properly tuned in or something. He's saying he's the Doctor, but does he really know what that means? Does he believe he's the Doctor? You know, I'm not sure on either count sometimes. That's my take on Ncuti.
Yeah, I think that that's fair, and I think that that guidance had to come from RTD and deliberately or through, what am I trying to say, as either a positive act or just an act of a lack of positive act. It didn't happen.
Now, I made a note, and this ties into Millie. What the happened with Millie? Question mark.
That was the point I was going to make as well,
Is
Rob,
that right?
Yeah. So the first time I saw the snow coming down around Ruby, and I've just gone, none of this paid off. None of this paid off.
No.
All of the mysterious stuff about Ruby, None of it paid off. All of the flashbacks, all of the snow, all of the space-time phenomenon, none of it paid off. What the hell? Yeah. And this was before the show was hiatus, cancelled, Gatwa left, whatever it was that happened. Yeah. This was before that happened.
Yeah. Well, we reported on all the rumours around the time that said Millie had been punted from being a companion. She was getting downgraded in season 2. We had the segment Millie Watch, Dave, in multiple episodes. And when we got to season 2, I think there was a trail of breadcrumbs because Belinda often felt quite disconnected from the season's, mysteries. Like Belinda wasn't really meant to be tied into them anyway because ... wasn't meant to be Ruby. Ruby herself kept popping back up in key episodes when Ruby really, really needed to be there. Some story elements seemed to fit Ruby's relationship with the Doctor a lot better than Belinda's, but they were given to Belinda, and you think, well, I think this was meant to be Ruby. There was concept art and production details that, sort of fueled speculation that changes were made during development, and none of this has ever been officially confirmed. Perhaps it never ever will, which leaves this idea that something out of the ordinary happened with Millie to be just fan speculation. I acknowledge that, but the way it happened and the way it was handled so weirdly and had us month after month talking about it on the podcast, it did create a strange feeling at times in watching the second season stuff. And in the end, and I think I mentioned this earlier in the show, Ruby doesn't even get a proper farewell in the finale.
Yeah.
So I think fans are still right to keep a thumbtack in that, just in case it ever gets raised again in the future, because I do think there is something there.
I agree with all of that. I think that we do not know whether some of the rumours were true or whether it was always the plan to have Ruby as the main companion for season 1 and a recurring character for season 2, and that was always in the contract. That could well be the case. We don't know. But all of that aside, There was still an episode where they said, we are going to have Ruby meet her birth mother and therefore explain what's going on. And it still didn't pay off anything that was set up. It was just dumb. Yeah. It was just ridiculous. That, to me, is not as big a shame as the fact that you created in Belinda a really, really strong character and then did nothing with her other than ducking out of the limelight to bring Ruby back in because Ruby's the kind of one we care about more anyway, and then giving her a horrible ending. But at least she got an ending, as you said. Ruby didn't even get that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, will these things ever be known? Sometimes I wonder, did something happen with Russell? Did he lose his mind for a while and just couldn't concentrate on the scripts or something? And one day, 20 years from now, he'll admit that was the case to explain what happened, or even if that did happen, would he ever admit to it? I don't know. I don't know Russell anymore, based on the last 3 years of things he said and then things haven't happened and so on. But it just feels like, what has happened? Why were things set up and not paid off? Was the intention just to never do that? Or was there an intention to do it and something has just caused it to not happen? I don't know. And maybe I'll never know.
When RTD, for the first time, wrote a scene where it starts randomly snowing around Ruby,
yep,
did he, in his mind, know why that happened? Or did you say, what a marvellous mystery, I'll work it out later?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer. And that I think is a question that, to me, sums up my ongoing concern about the era. And if I could have one question answered about the era, that would be symbolic of it.
Yeah, I think that's very, very, very fair. Should we talk a bit about RTD then? I know we talked about him a lot in the news segment. In fact, in some ways, the news segment forms part of this Ncuti Gatwa era discussion, if people can just piece the two together in their heads. But I think there is more to say about RTD, Dave, because it's funny. I shared with you just this past week something that very Pete Lambert said to me on X. And Pete said, RTD1 made a show he hoped people to his right would watch and see his underlying perspective on politics and society was something that they could engage with, and via very relatable characters and plot elements. RTD2 wanted them to fuck off. RTD1 knew that lore could be a springboard, and RTD2 drowned in it. And I think Pete's onto something there, because there does seem to be a very palpable difference between RTD's two eras. RTD1 was, by and large, embraced almost by everybody, even people who were terrified of the quote-unquote gay agenda back in 2005, barely blinked at what actually made it into the show. Yes, it was a little gay, it was a little soapy, it was a little political, it was a little sentimental, but there was something in there for everyone, and people largely bought into it. But some of the positions he took during this second stint just struck a lot of us, I think, as very odd hills to die on. We've mentioned the redesign of Davros, so he was no longer disabled. We've mentioned the sonic screwdriver. It was too gun-like. We have to change them. And these were things that were incredibly easy to take the piss out of before the era had even started. That's not good. Yet, what fascinates me is that RTD was completely sincere about them. There was no sense he was trolling or deliberately stirring controversy like J&T would attempt at times, like, oh, I'm going to change the TARDIS. You know, he had no intention of doing that, but he would say it to stir people up. You know, I think RTD absolutely believed these were worthwhile changes and worthwhile conversations he was putting into the show, regardless of fandom thinking he was being absolutely nuts. And already starting to wonder what season 1 was going to be like, with the Davros thing and the sonic screwdriver thing already happening.
I think it's important to note that there are people for whom this all worked really, really well. There are people who discovered the show in the Gatwa era. There are people who felt that the Gatwa Doctor spoke to them in ways that no Doctor before had. I think there were people that looked at the RTD mission in this series and said, yep, right on, brother, I'm there with you storming the barricade. So, look, if it worked for them, that's great. I don't agree with everything that Mr. Very Pete Lambert said, because I think that he's giving a bit too much structure to it. I simply think that somewhere along the way in this era, RTD forgot that the first thing he needs to do is tell a story. Because every single one of these episodes we've looked at, every single one, is actually a good Doctor Who story. It's just held back by, in my view, a slightly not doctorish enough Doctor, by some stupid mystery boxes, and by the writer desiring to say what he wanted to say being too strong. And RTD's not the only writer that's done this. Aaron Sorkin in The West Wing wrote a story that had an ethos that was very much Aaron Sorkin's ethos of how he wanted American politics to be.
Yeah.
But it was delivered in a very exciting drama. He then went and made The Newsroom, which, look, was a perfectly good piece of television, but it had episodes where literally you could feel the plot ground to a halt, and you might as well have had a big sign on the screen that said, author's message here.
Yeah.
And as a viewer, you're just going, I don't need you to have the characters give me a monologue telling me what Aaron Sorkin thinks about this point of American politics. I actually want to watch a good, exciting piece of television, and hopefully the characters acting as characters and telling a story makes me go, yeah. You know what? We need to look at, you know, what the Tea Party did to America. We need to look at what Obama's decision on this meant for society, not the Tea Party. And I think that's what RTD did here. You have moments of author's message here at the detriment of the story. And look, the Pertwee era got there sometimes, but at least if you're going to have homilies, you have some cool dinosaurs too.
Yeah, I hear. You know, you talk about storming the barricades. If we were still in the 80s, I think we'd say that RTD was being very right on. But why? Why now? You know, has he always thought this way and simply kept more of it under his hat during his first run? Probably. Did returning to the program make him feel like he'd earned the right to be more explicit about his views? You know, perhaps. Is it just getting older? You know, he's in his 60s now. And you can think of other creative figures, even someone like Steven Spielberg, whose ideas and priorities evolved over time. I famously think of when he changed all the bloody guns in E.T. to walkie-talkies. He was like, oh, we can't have people carrying guns. That's just terrible. Young Steven Spielberg was like, guns, this is fantastic. Let's blow shit up. Anyway, I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that what RTD was selling this second time around, a lot of people just weren't interested in buying. And whether that was because the audience and society had changed, or Russell had changed, or both had changed, I don't know the answer to that. But I suspect the answer is a mix of all those things. And unfortunately, I think Ncuti's era suffered as a result, even with stories with genuinely strong foundations, because I found the same, Dave, as I said in each of my pieces tonight. No matter what else I say about this, what underpins this story is really good. I think it's a great idea. I think it's really solid. But these stories end up getting remembered for the things that got layered on top of that. The casting decisions, the culture war stuff, gaudy CGI instead of just simple storytelling. Moments that just didn't feel very Doctor Who. I'm still dumbfounded, Dave, at how badly the RTD2 experiment, and by association seasons 1 and 2, which we're talking about here, worked out in the end, and that's what makes the whole thing feel a bit sad for me as well.
I think RTD genuinely thought this is what people wanted.
Right.
I think that he believed that people wanted a Doctor who was accessible and who was one of them. He believed that people wanted a Doctor who was not just romantic but sexual. He believed that people wanted to have right-on progressive messages front and centre, because that's the fight we're having today in society, and that's what the majority care about. And I think that was a misread. Not that people were against the things that he was for. They just actually wanted to turn on Doctor Who and escape from reality for 50 minutes with an adventure. Yeah. And I think that if you're not doing that, nothing else matters. I think that if you're not telling a story that's got the companion in danger from some creepy giant maggots, then what you're saying about industrial pollution is not going to be good. If you haven't got a really good adventure with the Master and the Doctor and Jo on a planet with aliens and ancient civilizations, then what you're saying about the exploitation of resources over and colonialists is irrelevant. That's really where I land. I think that, again, all the episodes we watched were good Doctor Who stories. Yep, there was just something a little bit off about the production and the tone. And as I said at the start of my summary, I'm not angry, I'm not dismissive, I'm not elated, I'm just a bit disappointed, I'm a bit sad, because this could have been a much better adventure.
100% agree with you. Absolutely. Well said.
Well, Rob, we're now getting to one of our more interesting parts, which is where we hear from all of you, the listeners, with our listeners' feedback. Do you want to kick us off with the first one, talking about the dissolving of Bad Wolf's partnership with the BBC and RTD's departure?
I can do, Dave. And as the person who collated this list, I will just say there was, 4 times as much, 5 times as much stuff that we could have included here. So this is only a selection of what we got sent on this topic. It was obviously a big topic.
Yeah.
First up, Lee Cameron Paul says, I think RTD checked out a long time ago, given his tone and the fact he's been outright lying to us for the past couple of years on different things.
Frankie Norton says, makes you wonder what to believe if you can't even believe anything that anyone connected with Doctor Who says. I know I'm heading towards the point where I wouldn't trust a word RTD says, and I really don't like saying that or feeling that.
Wow. Adrian Beck says, I'm disappointed about the Christmas special and that an era that promised so much has ended like this. So much for the Doctor Who multiverse. Was it writing, talent unrest, exec interference, or a tired IP? Maybe all factors. Bold move for RTD to return to Who in the first place, but his style is possibly better suited to other things these days. Still, in the right hands, it's an amazing show. Produced by Rob and Dave has a nice ring to it.
That's true, Adrian. I will say that just as you need many things to go right for a show to be a breakout success, you need many things to go wrong for it not to work.
Yeah.
Annabelle Rode says, This era made me embarrassed to be a Doctor Who fan. Self-indulgent fan service for the Tennant era straight away for the show's 60th. What should have been a celebration of all eras of the show. Some of the worst representation and social issue messaging in the show's history. The handling of Rose Noble will forever piss me off. Finales that were sheer nonsense that barely answered any of the build-up of said finale. What is the hidden song within Ruby that Maestro couldn't unlock? Who cares? Russell clearly didn't. And then the answers we did get were practically made up on the spot. What was Ruby's mother pointing at? Oh, it's a sign. That wasn't there in the Christmas special. Really? The complete mishandling of villains from the show's past. Do I even need to mention Omega? Some of the worst endings for companions. The way they treated Belinda. My God, I could go on. Even the things I did like Mr. Ring-a-Ding, are still surrounded by some of the most annoying decision-making that I have seen. I am just glad that Russell and Bad Wolf are off the show now. I hope they never return.
Wow, tell us what you really think, Annabelle. Simon Pittman says, the RTD statement feels like he's trying to give the impression that this whole cancellation has been amicable, when it feels like it hasn't. The multiple scripts report seems true enough, although I do wonder if he perhaps had some Series 3 ideas that he repurposed for the special, or if the BBC just didn't like the scripts he came up with for a special. Any resolution to that cliffhanger was going to be messy.
Very true. Mark Hevingham says, RTD needs to remember what stories he tells. Series 3 and 4 was written as of 2024. Then he was starting with the first season 5 scripts to be done in early 2025. Then nothing was done. Then he had written scripts reflecting who was playing the Doctor in the special. Then he hadn't. The guy has done us a great favour by leaving the show. My sincere hope is the next showrunner is not a Doctor Who fan and can write and commission stories that are for everyone. The show was a hit due to RTD in 2005, but that time has passed and it needs new ideas.
Yeah. Stuart Challens says, RTD probably wrote a script so bad they finally sacked him.
Peter Field says, with 62 plus years of content to continue to enjoy and debate, after my initial annoyance, I am feeling more zen and happy because of everything we already have and the excitement of what may happen eventually. Very well said, Peter. I agree.
Very nice. Now we have some comments on a Facebook post I put up on our podcast's Facebook page about tender not meaning cancellation. First up, Matt Barber says, feels weird because I agree with Rob. Oh, thank you, Matt. Fandom seems to be forming a death cult fetishizing the 1990s. I suspect because that was when they had more freedom and power. If you're drawing an equivalence between now and 1989 and suggest that this is a stealth cancellation rather than a process that most valued BBC series are going through to ensure their continued existence, you simply haven't been keeping up with the changes in the institution over the last 35 years.
Yes, and I think I've given my thoughts on that earlier on. Juan Not says, I feel a bit like we are revisiting the world of 1986 to 89 DWB at the moment. Haters gonna hate, but the self-destructive nature of Doctor Who fandom is just plain weird. For those that are hate mongers, take a breath and watch Frozen, because it's time to let it go.
Hoddy Allen says, any revival of the show will only result in more fans abusing other fans. If the new version appears less woke to the bullies, they'll gloat about it and use it to bully other fans. If it appears more woke, these same people will only increase their abuse and make it more intimidating for fans who want to comment positive things about the show. As it is now, there are fans who might want to add a comment, but they often have to read the room first, checking to see if it would be safe for them to do so. And if the stories seem dull and bland because they tried to eliminate anything that might offend the viewers, everyone will complain, tune out, and kill the show. I grew up with the Doctor's Adventures. I love all the episodes going back 60 years now, a treasure trove of amazing stories. I'm not sorry that I liked the recent episodes. It would have drawn in a new generation of fans who could also discover and enjoy its heritage, as it reflected the times these episodes were produced in, like the ones I watched growing up. But with the destructive path some fans have taken, it's probably best that the show be laid to rest. It will never be the same again, no matter how hard they try.
On the topic of our Doctor Who biographies and autobiographies episode of The List Makers, Michael Clunan says, great recommendations and happy to say I have read them all. Definitely going to read the J&T book again, and even though you didn't speak highly of it, I'm intrigued by the Ainley one. Have it but not yet read it. Also, a shout out to The Frood, the authorised and very official history of Douglas Adams by Jem Roberts, which focuses more on his hitchhikers than Who, admittedly.
Interesting. I've not read that one.
No, but I should read more about Douglas Adams. It's a good point, Michael.
Yeah, I have an unauthorised one somewhere on my shelves here, but not that one. Yeah. On our Sontaran Stratagem and Poison Sky episode, Dylan Mooney says, hello, Rob and Dave, and happy loose birthdays. Thank you very much. I have to say that this episode really was a huge comfort to myself. I adore this podcast. I feel the Sontaran two-parter was good but forgettable. Even for me, who was probably 3 when it aired, enjoyable but run-of-the-mill. P.S. Would you consider reviewing Red Dwarf? I know you've mentioned it, but I love it about 30 years too late.
Thank you, Dylan. Rob and I have regularly discussed if and how we should do an alternate galaxies on Red Dwarf. The problem is it would have to be a partial part of Red Dwarf. I say around about seasons 1 to 6. I think, Rob, you say even maybe to seasons 1 to 4.
Yeah, 1 to 4.
We'll do something sometime. We just have to work out how to do it because we're both big fans of early stuff, but I mean, I haven't even watched most of the later stuff.
Yeah.
Howard Mouse says, really enjoyed a chance to watch some Imperial Tenant. Still great Saturday tea time fun. This felt rooted in the unit adventures of the Pertwee era, particularly with the Doctor and Outsider butting heads with the military, whereas RTD2 unit is much more a superheroic Marvel universe. Also enjoyed the mum taking an axe to the car windscreen, a resolution to a cliffhanger that's actually a joke at the Doctor's expense.
Very nice. And Jonathan Riddle says, I remember seeing the Season 3 trailer in 2006 and foaming with excitement at what I thought were the Sontarans returning from the classic series. The leather-clad Hulks in that teaser turned out to be the Jadoon. I would have been sorely disappointed if Smith and Jones wasn't a peak episode in itself. When I saw the squat purple muscle suits in the Season 4 promos, I didn't like it. The performance by Christopher Ryan, however, absolutely sold it. For being a clone race, Lynx, Stahl and Strax all shine as individual characters.
Very, very true. And on our List Makers top plot twists in Doctor Who episode, Peter Thompson says, Ambassadors of Death is a great one, but then it is my top serial. Utopia also works so well because RTD set up a lot of it in previous episodes. It's why I wasn't a fan of the Rani reveal. They didn't put anything in the show to build it up, apart from Mrs. Flood appearing randomly, but it having no meaning and the Doctor not noticing. When Professor Yana becomes the Master, the show shows us he's bad straight away, and in the next episodes we learn he has history with the Doctor, but it's done in a way that new fans don't need to know, and it could even be a new character that has met the Doctor off screen. There's a few New Who ones I liked in episodes that weren't great themselves. The Series 5 Silurian two-partner had the great moment where Rory vanishes through the crack and the Doctor pulls part of the TARDIS through. I like the fact that Series 5 revealed stuff slowly rather than the RTD arc idea of just having a word repeated. Also, the Rebel Flesh Almost People two-parter had the ending with Amy being revealed to be one of the Flesh, which I didn't see coming. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I also have one for the Hat of Rassilon, but not sure if this has been done before, your top 10 Easter eggs. One of my issues with Disney Who was a reliance on nostalgia, but I do like it when we get small Easter eggs to past stories, characters, etc.
Interesting idea. I've got to say, I noticed those things in the moment, but then I probably forget them the week after. That there was a reference to that story or, whatever.
Yeah, yes, that would be the problem compiling a list. But we'll put it in the hat and we can deal with that if it comes up.
Yeah, oh, look, there's a coat hanging on the coat rack. That's the coat from such and such story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed them in the moment, but later. On the passing of Anthony Stewart Head, Brett Hoskins says, I quite liked him in Repo, the genetic opera. The premiere of Jonathan Creek, which also featured Colin Baker, is another go-to. To get quite obscure, he was also in a series of ads for Taster's Choice Coffee as a romantic lead that Nescafe ripped off here in Australia. Of course, all of that is completely overshadowed by his work on Buffy. He was so important to the success of that show, which otherwise would have been 90210 or One Tree Hill with vampires. Was glad, if that's the word, to hear his daughter's partner and other family members were there with him when he died. That's the best any of us can hope for. Rest in peace.
Yes, really nice thoughts there, Brett, and you're right absolutely about his role in Buffy. I'll chuck in there Merlin as well, which I thought he added a gravitas to that show that would have been missing without him.
Yeah, and had we had a normal news segment in this episode, we would have absolutely talked about Anthony Stewart Head's passing. Of course, Doctor Who alum as well.
No, absolutely. On our Blood Harvest episode of the Doctor Who show, Jeremy Power says, "Hi, Dave and Rob." Dave and Rob? Someone did it the other way around.
I don't know about that.
Thank you, Jeremy.
That doesn't come off the tongue.
Hi, Dave and Rob. Really enjoyed the April episode. I caught the synopsis, which was a great help, but as I am sure you both appreciate, nothing beats reading the actual book. Tracking down a copy was a real mission, since it isn't on Kindle or Google Books, and eBay prices are getting a bit mental. It feels like joining a book club with only the Cliff Notes. It would be brilliant if you could occasionally pick some titles available on digital platforms so more of us can read along and join the party. Love the chat anyway. Cheers. Jeremy, good feedback. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say something I replied to Jeremy with. I think this was a Facebook comment, because it might help other people out there. A lot of the books that we read are available in PDF format or Kindle format, screen reader format on archive.org. And I even went on there and typed, or I just went to Google actually and typed Blood Harvest Doctor Who PDF, and the first hit or two was from archive.org. So these stories we do talk about are very easy to get a hold of using something like archive.org, where people have scanned in novels. And I recommend, if someone doesn't want to pay for a novel or can't because it's simply $100 or something, do check out archive.org or do a Google search for the name of the book plus PDF, and I'm pretty sure you'll find most of the ones we talk about.
Well, that's helpful to know as well.
And finally, a random message from Dennis Gill. Hello, Doctor Who Show. Love the podcast and the different topics you showcase every week, ever since I listened since late 2025. So, my question is, do you have Q&A podcasts? Because I'm a first-time listener and I love sending questions about lore and discussion.
Well, Dennis, we absolutely do have, maybe once a year or so, an Ask Us Anything episode, and the next time that comes up, we look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, but honestly, you can send us an email anytime and we'll read it out at the end of the show, and if you ask a question in it, we'll probably answer it, like I answered Jeremy's question about PDF books. Yeah.
Absolutely, but great to hear from you. Glad you're enjoying the show. We'll get towards the end of our episode with what have we been watching. I'm just going to say I watched season 5 of Clarkson Farm. I thought this was a step up from season 4. There was some really interesting stuff in there, some really tender moments in there. It does end on a cliffhanger, although given that it was filmed 6 months ago, how much for a cliffhanger is it really?
A year ago.
Yeah, so, but no, I really enjoyed that. I also rewatched the Alan Clark Diaries, starring John Hurt, which was a little sort of sitcom made based on the diaries of Tory MP Alan Clark, and I found that very entertaining again.
Oh, very nice. I've watched so many things, Dave, as I want to do. Clarkson's Farm 5, completely agree. That's a show that has no right to be as entertaining or as educational as it is. Fantastic. Yep. I watched the 3 Brendan Fraser mummy films for the first time in ages. The CGI in those is starting to really show its age. It's actually horrific in the first couple, but the movies are still quite fun. Speedway Murders is a Netflix doco about these 4 kids being marched out of a fast food joint they're working at in the US in the late 70s, and they all get murdered. Interestingly, they shot that in Australia, the reenactment stuff, which I found very strange. Like they made up an Australian town to look like America and got these Australian actors to do US accents. Very strange. Don't know how that came about. Chessmates is another Netflix doco about that rising chess star a few years ago. People might remember this. It was very notable. Who beat one of the world's best players, and then everyone thought it was because he had something up his butt to buzz to coordinate his moves. That was a very strange story. And The Truth and Tragedy of Mariah Wilson, another Netflix doco about this great cyclist coming up who gets murdered and how they solved that. And finally, The Legend of Vox Machina Season 4, which is an anime-style show by the Critical Role group of role players. I've spoken about that one every season it's been on. My wife and I love it. Season 4 was another good one.
There you go. A couple of quick shout-outs for fans of Fraser Hines living in Sydney and Melbourne. He is going to be back guesting at a Sirens of Audio event near you in August, so check that out if you're keen to see him. He's a very entertaining guest. And Rob, we don't often give podcast shout-outs, but you gave a very heartfelt shout-out to an episode of Too Hot for TV called I Heart the 90s, and yes. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it, and I, like you, am also getting all the feels and all the memories from that one. If you're someone who grew up watching sci-fi fantasy in the 90s and want to be nostalgic about it, go check out Too Hot for TV I Heart the 90s episode.
Oh, it was so good. And even though these people, and I think I wrote something about this on social, even though these people are talking about things that happened for them where they were growing up, you got some Scottish guys talking about things that were happening, I think in Edinburgh or somewhere, and Dylan Rees is talking about Birmingham, you can still relate to it because the same bloody things happened here on the other side of the world. And it's quite amazing.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things I took out of it. In Doctor Who, all the British podcasts are talking about a show that they had and that we in Australia had to get. But when you start talking about X-Files, Buffy, Star Trek, all of those sort of shows, Britain was in the same place we were, sometimes worse. So there was a lot more connectivity there. And yeah, that was really fun. We don't give a lot of shout outs to podcasts, but that hit us both. Now, Rob.
Yes.
It's time to look at next month. We have done a lot of new Who stuff lately. We've talked about the Gatwa era. We've talked about the Sontaran stratagem. We've talked about Torchwood. We've talked about a new adventure. So we've said next time, let's go deep into something classic era, classic to watch. We are going to be putting up a poll. Watch out for that on all of our social media. We will be nominating 2 stories each. Rob, what are you nominating for July?
Dave, for July, my picks, and I hope one of these bloody gets up, are The Deadly Assassin and Resurrection of the Daleks.
I would happily watch either of those. My picks, The Sea Devils.
Ooh.
And Tomb of the Cybermen.
Oh, wow. Oh, I can see the vote being split again. They're all great stories.
They are all great stories. I would happily watch any of them. So listeners, it's over to you. We've given you a lot of views on a lot of things. Would love to hear your feedback. But look, we'll wrap it all up there. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I've been Dave.
And I've been Rob.
And we'll talk about some classic Doctor Who in a month. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.